Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to the AMA podcast. I am your host, Matt Ruddick. Thank you guys so much for joining us on today's episode. It's a very special episode. I've got Tyler Dobbs, the AMA Government Affairs Director, here on the show in the studio. It's the first news show of the year, and I can't think of a better person to have on than you, Tyler. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I know that we just can't wait to get into some really good stuff.
2020 is going to be a busy year. I'll say that. Busy
year indeed. Yeah. So, obviously, everybody's aware there's been a lot of things that have come down the pike over the last month. Really, we had the news that came out that for the testing stuff that's going to be coming down. We got named to the as one of the members that are going to be taking part in that. We also have some news on the 400-foot situation as well.
Yeah, we do. That you mentioned testing. Yeah, that's that's obviously coming. We heard that test may be rolled out in December of this year. That doesn't look like that's going to happen. In fact, the FAA did. They named some of the people who had submitted the request for information to the FAA a few months ago. AMA was one of those. We would like the opportunity to be a part of that process from start to finish, and we have been a part of that process. If our members are going to be forced to go down that path and take that test, then we certainly want to make sure that the test is going to be valuable and useful, and make sure that we have an input and everybody's recognized in that. So we actually have a meeting regarding that test here in a couple weeks in D.C. with the FAA and the other organizations that were selected. So we're looking forward to that and seeing where that process goes.
Right. So let's then talk about the 400-foot altitude restrictions. I know you guys have been working with a handful of clubs to try to get those limits changed.
So, you set me down here. It's been a few months ago, and we have regular meetings with the FAA, and one of those meetings didn't go very well, and we actually were told, look, you're at 400 feet in airspace. There's not going to be an exemption. There's not going to be a process to get around that, which was just unacceptable. Mm-hmm. At that point, we reached out to our members and we said, look, you need to contact Congress, your senators and your representative, and say, this is unacceptable. We've been flying at these altitudes safely for decades. Don't tell us we can't do it. Tell us what process we need to go through so we are able to do it. Well, that worked. The FAA heard our members and through Congress and put forward a process to allow that to happen. So what they call it is an SRM panel, or a safety risk mitigation panel. And we did a national one in Washington, D.C., back in, 1st of December, actually. Mm-hmm. It was a couple-week process that we came up with some scenarios of what flying sites look like, what happens at that location, the manned air traffic, and any safety risks that may be associated with those areas. And we were able to come up with some solutions or possible solutions and mitigations that could lower that risk to the point to where operations could continue as they have or similar to as they have. Right. If you're a club and you're operating right next to a Class B airport or in close proximity, and you've been flying at 2,000 feet, but you're within a half mile of a flight pattern or something like that, maybe it's not going to be the exact way that you operated before, but we can get you to altitudes that are higher than the 400 feet limit. So, it varies. It all depends on your location, the mitigations that we can put in place to make things safer than what they are just at the standard operating level. So we did that at the national level. We hope to see that report soon. The weeks following, we actually had 4 local SRM panels. I personally attended one in Detroit, Michigan, and one in Nashville, Tennessee, and they were for AMA clubs who have fixed flying site locations in controlled airspace near airports, and they had requested altitudes above 400 feet for those locations in their letters of agreement. They were initially, I won't say denied, but the letter of agreement wasn't signed off on.
Right.
They agreed to go through this safety risk mitigation panel and try to see if we could mitigate the risks that they were concerned about. When I say they, I mean air traffic in the area, to a safe level to where our operations could continue up to the altitudes that the club requested. Again, we did 4 of those. That's been 2 weeks ago. All 4 got to the altitudes that they had requested it in the LOA process. So we were extremely happy with that. I know that's been probably our number one question here the last few months is 400 feet altitude is going to kill us. We do turbine jets and large model aircraft and soaring and other things. What's AMA going to do to make this happen? What's the FAA going to do to make this happen? And while it's been a slow start, we've only went through 4 of these. We did get the altitudes that the clubs requested at those 4 locations.
So they actually, it wasn't they are able to surpass 400 feet and they get 700 feet. They actually got what they requested for their flying sites.
They did. They got they had to put some safety risks in place, or some mitigation factors in place. I believe one club, when they operate above 400 feet, and that club requested 600 feet, so a 200-foot higher altitude increase. While they're operating in that 400 to 600 foot range, the operator needs to have a spotter on site, checking the airspace for full-scale manned aircraft.
Which is stuff that we're already doing anyway.
A lot of clubs do that anyways. So it wasn't an issue for the club. The club said, absolutely, we have no problem doing that at all.
Right.
And that's the thing is, as they work through these panels, the club has input. It is basically an FAA decision, but the club and AMA headquarters were looked at for our input on what's going on at the location, how the field's set up, things like that. The club doesn't have to agree to use a spotter and things like that. They won't get the altitude they're requesting if they don't.
Right.
But it's spotters and things like that won't be forced down their throat. You just may not get the altitude you're requesting, or you may get a lower altitude than you're requesting if you're not willing to put those in place.
I'm sure, though, from the FAA's perspective, having a club that was like, yeah, absolutely, we'll totally have, agree to these certain terms and conditions, that there's stuff that they're already doing anyway.
Oh, sure.
From the FAA's perspective, they've got to, that's got to be a good sign, I think, for us, for the FAA to see that, and maybe they think, well, this is going to be an easier process than we thought, maybe.
It is. And, I heard a number of times, and our members tell me daily, AMA is not the problem. Our members are not the problem, and we agree. The FAA, I don't know how many times I heard that at the national level, is we understand AMA. You guys don't create the issues for us in the airspace, but this process is going to be nationwide for everybody who wants to set
They're not discriminating between
site. Right.
Anybody,
so just because AMA is not a problem doesn't mean that Joe and his buddies who want to create a flying site next week won't be. So unfortunately, they're setting up a national standardization process for this. So while it certainly helps that we have a strong history of safety culture in our community, and that's recognized, that's a weighing factor. It's not the only factor. So, but it is nice to hear that when you go to these panels that AMA, we haven't had any issues at this site. Your members aren't the problem. We like communication, and your members overly communicate. That's a good thing. That
is a good problem
rather
to
have too much communication than not enough.
So let me ask you this then. So there's been these SRM panels on a national level. We've had a few that have gone on a local level. Does that mean every club moving forward will have to go through one of these SRM panels?
We don't think every club. One, if you're a club that's flying an uncontrolled airspace or Class G airspace that's away from a heavily trafficked airport, those clubs are at the legislation says that you fly at 400 feet and below in uncontrolled airspace. We think there will be a process for flights above 400 feet at those. We don't know if it will be the same process or a similar process. But if you're at a club in uncontrolled airspace and you don't fly above 400 feet, you're not going to have to go through one of these safe risk mitigation panels or SRM panels. If you're in controlled airspace and you're requesting higher than the Lance grid authorization or above 400 feet, then we think you're going to have to go through one of these panels. There's been a delay with the holidays, Christmas and the New Year's, but we expect once New Year's passes, some more clubs will be selected by the FAA to go through this process. And AMA doesn't weigh in on which clubs get selected when. That's an FAA decision, and they're working with air traffic controllers. They're busy people, so seeing when their schedule allows for these panels to take place. And the local panels are a one-day process. It does take a majority of the day. They bring in people from air traffic. They bring in people from air traffic operations in Washington, D.C. The airlines are invited. Other organizations are invited. Anybody who has really, or a lot of people who have some sort of skin in the game in the airspace world are invited to take part in these panels and share their concerns.
You know, the thing that I think about that process, the fact that you do have all these people in a room talking about these things, you know, there's a lot of things that can get lost in translation when you're just filling out a form. And yeah, we've had, you know, 2 decades of flying at this location with no incidents, etc. I feel like it's a different situation when you're actually saying that out loud in front of people and actually telling them, here's our track record. Here are the things we've done for our community. Here are the things that we've been able to accomplish at our field without any incident happening whatsoever. I think that bodes well, in my opinion. I would assume you probably think the same.
No, I completely agree. When everybody's in there together and you have people from general aviation and commercial aviation and AMA clubs there being represented and air traffic control, and you know, they're all sitting together and they say, well, you know, I've been flying at this area for 20 years and I didn't even know the club was there. Mm-hmm. The club says, well, we've been there for 40. You know, that's good to hear. Is there's never been an incident, obviously, at that location, or not one to the point where it was reported, at least. And so far we've had a lot of success. I think our members know, and the aviation community as a whole, that our organization is extremely safe, and you know, we want to do what's right. And I think as we go through this process, we're going to hear more stories like that. Is, you know, AMA, we want to accommodate you. We want to work with you guys. We understand that everybody's in the same bucket right now, and you may feel that you're getting the shaft or the short end of the stick on some of the things. And in a lot of ways we are, but it is a changing environment. And unfortunately, as much as we don't like it, we do have to jump through the hoops that the FAA is putting in front of us. So.
Well, speaking of hoops, I mean, those are some of the good stuff, things that are happening right now, some of the successes we're having. So just, I guess, as we record this about a week ago-ish, the notice for proposed rulemaking was released by the FAA with regard to remote ID.
That's right. Actually, it'll be officially published tomorrow, New Year's Eve. But yeah, we do have copies of that. It is out for review, and yeah, that's the talk right now.
It's the elephant in the room. As
is. You know, with the holidays around us, everybody's been busy, and I actually brought it. It's 319 pages here. If you're watching this on video, you can take a look at that. So that was my weekend read, and the last, well, since it came out, I've been going through that. It's a lot to dissect and take in. You know, we sent out a message to our members saying that the rule had been posted, and you know, there was some concerns with it. There was a few things that AMA requested. You know, as we pushed through this, we thought, you know, we could live with some sort of remote ID if it allowed for our members, and, you know, even those outside of AMA membership, to fly at designated flying sites that the FAA recognizes without some sort of transponder or internet and things like that at the location, which this does allow for. So we're happy with that.
But there are some caveats to that.
There are caveats that we're not happy with, you know, and I know you and I are going to sit down here in the next couple of days and go through this rule in detail. We're also going to have comments that we're creating for our members to comment on publicly to the FAA, because that is important. I want to stress that enough. We want our members to comment on this proposed rule. It will have an impact on the hobby. It will not be, you know, for many cases, it will not be a good impact. And you can have the number of comments matters. You can have the best comment in the world that, you know, someone with common sense would read and say, wow, I didn't think of it that way. But if that's the only comment that says
they're only looking at the number of comments,
then the FAA can say, yeah, but we only had one person say that.
Right.
But, you know, if they say, oh, well, we had 1,000 people say the same thing, then that's different. So believe me, the number of comments matters.
And that's been proven before with stuff we've done.
You know, with the interpretive rule and other things, you know, that took years for them to go through, and really, you know, almost never finished with the change in the law. But regardless, we will need a huge turnout on this in terms of our members and those outside of membership commenting. AMA's reaching out to our allies and our friends in the industry. We're going to have them comment. We are also reaching out to manufacturers and distributors and others. We're going to bring them in and discuss what this remote ID rule is going to mean for them. It's important to point out this is a proposed rule right now.
Right.
So it is not the rule. It is what the FAA, if the FAA could get exactly what they want in terms of remote ID, this would be it. Fortunately, the
Doesn't
way the
work that
government
way.
works, right, is that the citizens who give the power to the government get to comment on that.
Yeah.
So that's the process we're at right now.
And that's a very slow process too.
It is.
I mean, even if, and please tell me if I'm wrong here, but even if tomorrow the comment duration was over and they have to go through all that stuff, I mean, we're still talking
Years.
2 or 3 years at least before this could even get implemented.
And then there's a compliance period that would
Right.
allow manufacturers and even users some grace to comply with the new rules. So we are talking in terms of years before we would see any of this. But even more importantly than that, let's not focus on the time frame because there is some time.
Right.
Basically, this will be published tomorrow. There will be 60 days to comment. AMA is going to request an extension for the comment period, which we hope will be accepted and will probably give us a total of 90 days to comment. We just want to make sure everybody's voices are heard in this. But once we do comment on that, the FAA will go through and they will take in all those comments. They'll read them. That will be taken into account as they work on the final rule. So again, the number of comments is important. Comment yourself, pick up the phone, call your friends, tell them to comment. Friends, family, everybody you can get to comment. That's going to be important on this. AMA is going to be creating some, our template comments, but we encourage everybody, add your own to that.
Absolutely, because everybody has their own story.
Everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own concerns. We're going to break this all down in a report that should be published. Well, by the time you see this, it'll already be on our website, but there'll be a report outlining the specifics of this. I know you and I are going to sit down and try to break it down into layman's terms because this is, if the average person tries to read 319 pages, their eyes are going to glaze over.
There's actually, there's an executive summary that I actually looked at that was only 2 or 3 pages long.
There's a nice chart too that's 5, 6, 7 pages.
It broke it down
breaks it down
much easier than reading through the whole thing.
So, and high level, the flying sites, we're happy that process is in place. We're not happy how the process is set up. So that will be something that our comments address. Registration is a concern that we have with this. I'm sure many of the listeners are aware that this is changing the registration rule, and it's going to require that each aircraft be registered separately.
As opposed to weight is now, which is one pilot has to register, and they register for their entire fleet.
That's exactly right. And, we think that's still a good approach is one pilot, you get one registration number. That's good for all your aircraft. Yeah. If the intent is to find the person who is flying the aircraft, then we don't understand why that would matter if each aircraft is represented with a unique number. That one number is still going to come back to that owner, and that owner is going to be able to be identified. So if that's the true intent, then we would like that to be shown in the final rule. If the intent is that the FAA wants to, fund some other type of aspect of this, UTM or
because in the way this now is written, would that mean that I would have to pay $5 for every aircraft?
Well, we don't know. In the language of this, and I said I wouldn't get too deep, but in the language of this, it says that the number of aircraft would be taken into account. Gotcha. The more you register, the deeper the discount would be. I don't know if $5 per aircraft would be the starting point. It doesn't outline that, but it does say that it would recognize that members or hobbyists own large number of aircraft, so they would take that into account.
But I think the lack of specifics in this is probably just as big of a reason for us to say,
absolutely,
hey, we've got to take a look at another look at this.
What I will say is there is a financial aspect to it. I mean, this will cost the hobbyist additional funds to be
It'll
able to
cost the
operate
hobbyist
their
additional funds. It's going to cost the manufacturers
That's
additional
a whole nother
funds.
thing, right? Yeah, the manufacturers, that's a concern. As I mentioned, we're bringing the manufacturers in here and having a discussion with them. We want to go over some of the requirements and standardization that would be required under this and have that discussion with the manufacturers. So that's something that's happening simultaneously to comments. So, but the important thing is again, AMA website, modelaircraft.org. You're going to be able to find a breakdown of this by the time this podcast is live. We're going to have comments for our members to submit. Everybody, submit a comment. If this is our chance to change this rule, and numbers do matter, we need the biggest turnout as possible.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to have links to all of that stuff all the links to where you can find out how to submit a comment. Kind of our form comment that we're providing for folks if they want to go that route. We'll have links to all that in the description of this video, as well as the episode description in this podcast. So you can find all that stuff there.
I'll point out is we talked about the 400-foot rule. As I mentioned, we did a podcast, 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And it was across the community, doom and gloom. We're not going to ever be above 400 feet. And we felt like we were all down at that point. But we worked the process. Our members engaged. Our members reached out to Congress. They were calling them on the phone. They were sending emails every day for weeks on end, and we changed it and got the outcome that we desired.
All of that stuff matters,
Yeah.
and that's an important thing I think
agree.
to point out.
So that's the same thing. While again, this is just what the FAA would want if they could have everything they wanted.
Yeah.
Just because they want it doesn't mean that we have to give it to them. So this is our time. Work the process. Reach out. Submit the comments. Reach out to your senators, reach out to your representative, let them know that this would negatively impact your hobby, your community, it could be your job, whatever. Work the process, and we can see a similar outcome. So I think that's important to recognize.
And to not get discouraged by the amount of time that this process takes, because I know people want to see these things change overnight.
That's not going to happen.
And it's never going to happen. And not just with government. I mean, that's across the board. So I think it's important also don't get discouraged by the time it's going to take to make these changes, because it's been shown that these changes can be made.
Right.
And all we have to do is be diligent about, writing our Congress people, writing the FAA, submitting these comments, and we can make these changes happen. But it's going to take all of us. We can't, section ourselves into two factions. Well, this group over here, it's all their fault, and this group over here, it's all their fault. I mean, we got to come together as one big hobby, I think, because that's the one thing I see. When I'm out on social media, I see a lot of this infighting, and it's your fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. No, man, we've got to come together.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we can argue faults later.
Yeah, right. It's not the time for that.
At this point, let's unite and let's tell the FAA that this is not a solution that's going to work for us.
Right, exactly.
So I think that should be the focus right now. If you have time to make the argument on whose fault it is, you have time to pick up the phone and tell your buddies, hey,
I agree.
Hey, send in your comments to that remote ID. This needs to be our focus,
because again, numbers
we can change
matter.
this, and numbers matter.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for coming and talking to us a little bit about this. As you said, we're going to be talking a little more about this more in depth here in the coming weeks, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I know this has been a topic that everybody kind of wanted to get some information on, and we're still learning about. I mean, again, it's a 320-page document. There's a lot to kind of digest from all this. So, as we learn more, as more information comes in, we're going to get that stuff out to you as quickly as we can, and as efficiently as we can. So please stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe right here on the podcast, on your favorite podcasting platform. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. Both of those places are going to be places you're going to find more information as it becomes available. So with that, Tyler, again, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching. This has been another episode of the AMA Podcast. We hope to see you right here back next week, next Monday, as a matter of fact, on another episode of the AMA Podcast.